us?
Miss Bennet.
I did not expect to see you. He understood all the family were from home, or we should never have presumed.
I returned a day early.
I've had a rather emotional day, so whatever your beef with Eggsy is, and I'm sure it's well-founded.
Colin Firth has spent more than 4 decades being watched. Audiences know his face from a lake scene in a soaked white shirt, from an Oscar podium in 2011, from the awkward stammer of a king who never wanted to rule. What audiences know far less well is the private ledger running underneath all of it. A childhood that never let him settle in one place, a father he became before he was ready, a marriage that lasted 22 years and still ended in public wreckage, and a decade in his 60s spent quietly figuring out who he is once the applause fades. This is the story of how a man built one of the most respected careers in British acting while his personal life kept coming apart and being rebuilt around him, again and again. Firth was born on September 10, 1960, in the Hampshire village of Greyshot, into a family defined by scholarship and faith rather than roots. His father was a history lecturer who had also worked as an education officer in Nigeria. His mother taught comparative religion. Both of his grandfathers had been clergymen, one Anglican, one Congregationalist. It was a household built around ideas and belief, not permanence, and permanence was the one thing young Colin rarely got. Within months of his birth, the family moved to Nigeria, where his father took a post at the University of Ibadan. They returned to England by the time he was 4, but the pattern of packing up and starting over had already been set, and it repeated itself hard in 1971. When an 11-year-old Firth was uprooted again, this time to St. Louis, Missouri, for his father's visiting academic post. American classmates mocked his accent mercilessly. He responded the way a lot of displaced children do. He learned to disappear into a different version of himself, flattening his vowels, pretending not to care about his schoolwork, doing whatever it took to stop standing out. It worked in the narrow sense that it got him through. It also planted something that would matter enormously later, an early, painful education in performing a self that wasn't quite the real one. Back in England, secondary school in Winchester brought more of the same isolation. It was only in his early teens, watching Paul Scofield's performance in A Man for All Seasons, that something clicked. Acting wasn't just entertainment to him. It looked like a place where all that displaced feeling could actually go somewhere useful. He started attending drama workshops at 10 and had made his decision by 14. 2 years later at Barton Peveril Sixth Form College, a teacher named Penny Edwards deepened his love of literature so much that Firth has called that period among the happiest of his life. From there it was London, the National Youth Theatre, a stint in the wardrobe department at the National Theatre, and then Drama Centre London, a demanding conservatoire that also produced Pierce Brosnan and Helen McCrory. The training at Drama Centre was famously unsentimental, built around 6-day weeks and a Stanislavski-based method that pushed students to strip away habitual performance rather than lean on it. It wasn't designed to make anyone comfortable, and it demanded the same kind of self-erasure Firth had already learned as a bullied 11-year-old in Missouri, just repurposed now into an actual craft. Playing Hamlet in his final year got him noticed by playwright Julian Mitchell, who put him into the West End production of Another Country, taking over the lead role from Daniel Day-Lewis. The 1984 film version gave Firth his screen debut opposite Rupert Everett, and the two developed a rivalry that entertainment journalists chewed on for years, something Everett later attributed to plain professional jealousy rather than any real animosity. Firth has since said the friction resolved itself and that he counts Everett among the people in the industry he genuinely likes. Even in his earliest professional years, though, there was already a pattern of hard, complicated relationships sitting just beneath the surface of his public success. A pattern that would define much of what came next. Nothing in Firth's career means more than 1995. The BBC's adaptation of Pride and Prejudice aired that September, and by the time the final episode ran, Firth's life had changed shape entirely. His performance as Mr. Darcy turned him into a genuine household name, and one scene in particular, Darcy emerging from a lake in a wet shirt, became a piece of British television history, watched by more than 10 million people and written up in newspapers on both sides of the Atlantic. What made the performance land wasn't showiness. It was restraint, the sense that Darcy's pride was a wall built to hide something more vulnerable underneath. Author Helen Fielding was watching too, closely enough that she built an entire character, Mark Darcy, around Firth's persona for her Bridget Jones novels. Firth would go on to play that character across 4 films over 24 years, ending with Bridget Jones' Mad About the Boy in 2025. While his career took off, his personal life was already carrying real weight. A relationship with actress Meg Tilly, his co-star in the 1989 film Valmont, had produced a son, William, born in September 1990. The couple settled in British Columbia before splitting in 1994, making Firth a father at 30 and a separated one shortly after. During the filming of Pride and Prejudice itself, he became involved with co-star Jennifer Ehle, a relationship the public only learned about once it had ended. By 1997, he had met Livia Giugioli, an Italian film producer, on the set of the BBC drama Nostromo, and the two married that same year. Sons Luca and Matteo arrived in 2001 and 2003, and for a while the marriage looked like the stable center around which the rest of his rapidly expanding career could revolve. That career kept expanding through the 2000s. A BAFTA nomination for Bridget Jones's Diary, Girl with a Pearl Earring in 2003, a central place in the Love Actually ensemble that same year. Then in 2009, Tom Ford's A Single Man asked something different of him, playing a grieving gay professor in 1960s Los Angeles contemplating whether to go on living after his partner's death, a performance built almost entirely on what wasn't said out loud. It won him the BAFTA for Best Actor, his first Academy Award nomination, and the Volpe Cup at Venice. Critics reached for words like masterclass. It proved, in a way lighter roles never had, that Firth could carry a film's full emotional weight without raising his voice. The King's Speech arrived the following year and did something rare. It put the right actor in the right role at exactly the right cultural moment. Firth played the future King George VI, wrestling with a severe stammer on the eve of the Second World War, opposite Geoffrey Rush as his speech therapist. Made for roughly £8 million, the film grossed over $414 million worldwide, one of the most successful independent British films ever produced. At the 83rd Academy Awards, it picked up 12 nominations and 4 wins, including Best Picture and Best Actor for Firth. He took the Golden Globe, the BAFTA, and the Screen Actors Guild Award for the same role, joked from the podium in February 2011 that his career had probably just peaked, got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, landed on Time's list of the world's most influential people, and was appointed a Commander of the Order of the British Empire that same year. In 2016, motivated by Brexit and a wish to keep a European identity, he took Italian citizenship through Livia. On paper, it was as complete a professional run as any actor of his generation has had. The kind of stretch where every award season seems to have his name already written into it, and every interviewer wants to know what's next rather than what came before. None of that visible momentum, though, gave any real indication of what was happening at home. That's often how it works with people whose job is, in a sense, projecting composure for a living. The more convincingly a person can perform control on camera, the less anyone around them assumes there's anything to look for underneath it. Underneath that run, the marriage was already cracking. Between 2015 and 2016, Colin and Livia went through a private separation they managed to keep almost entirely out of public view. During that period, Livia became involved with Marco Brancaccia, an Italian journalist she had known since childhood. The couple later reconciled, and Firth issued a public statement in 2018 acknowledging the situation once the story broke in the press. What made it uglier than an ordinary tabloid affair story was the legal fallout. Livia filed a stalking complaint against Brancaccia once their relationship ended, Italian authorities pursued charges, and the matter was resolved through an undisclosed settlement in 2018, with Brancaccia publicly disputing her account. For a man whose whole public image rested on composure and reserve, having that much private turmoil dragged into international headlines was its own particular ordeal. The reconciliation ultimately did not hold. In 2019, after more than 22 years of marriage, Colin and Livia announced their separation, asking simply for privacy and noting they intended to stay close for their children's sake. The divorce was finalized in 2021. Firth was in his late 50s, starting over in the unglamorous, ordinary way most people do, quietly, without any of the ceremony his career had trained the public to expect from him. It's hard not to notice how deliberately Firth leaned into stories about loss in the years that followed. Supernova, in 2020, cast him opposite Stanley Tucci as a man watching his partner slip away to dementia, a project with an emotional directness that felt lived in rather than performed. The Staircase, an HBO limited series in 2022, put him in far murkier territory. Playing novelist Michael Peterson, accused of murdering his wife, a role that asked him to sit inside moral ambiguity in a way that ran against everything his public image had stood for. It earned him Emmy nominations for both Conspiracy and The Staircase, recognition that many audiences, still picturing the romantic leading man, took a while to catch up to. It was also on that set that he met American television writer Maggie Cohn. The two made their red carpet debut together at the Empire of Light premiere in 2022, and by most accounts have remained together since. In January 2025, Firth took on one of the most demanding roles of his career, playing Dr. Jim Swire in Lockerbie. A Search for Truth, a 5-part Sky Atlantic and Peacock drama based on Swire's own memoir. Swire's daughter Flora died aboard Pan Am Flight 103 when it was bombed over Lockerbie, Scotland, in December 1988, and the series follows his decades-long campaign to uncover what really happened. Swire himself was closely involved in the production and has spoken warmly about Firth's performance, which critics singled out as some of the most powerful work of his later career. A quiet, controlled study of grief that never resolves into anything as clean as closure. Later that same year, Firth returned one final time as Mark Darcy in Bridget Jones' Mad About the Boy, closing out a character he had first played in 2001. What began as a knowing joke about Firth's own Darcy typecasting had, over 24 years, become something more sincere. A character who had visibly aged, loved imperfectly, and been loved imperfectly back, watched by an audience that had grown up alongside him. At 65, Firth's professional standing shows no sign of fading. He appeared in 2026 in Steven Spielberg's science fiction thriller Disclosure Day alongside Emily Blunt, Josh O'Connor, and Coleman Domingo, the kind of high-profile ensemble project that plenty of actors his age are simply no longer offered. His personal life, meanwhile, has settled into something more complicated than either recovered or tragic. He and Livia, both now in new relationships, she remarried to Scottish activist Callum Grieve, he in a long-term relationship with Maggie Cohn, have by Livia's own public account maintained a close, cooperative friendship built around their sons, describing their situation as one extended, unconventional family rather than a clean break. That's really the part of the story that gets flattened whenever Firth's life gets told as pure heartbreak. Yes, there was a childhood that never let him feel settled anywhere. Yes, there was a first family that ended before his son turned 4, a second marriage that lasted more than 2 decades and still collapsed publicly and painfully, and a stretch of years in which an Oscar and a quiet marital unraveling were happening at exactly the same time, even though the world only ever saw one of those stories clearly. But what came after the collapse wasn't ruin. It was Firth continuing to take on roles that cost him something. A grieving widower, a father chasing an unanswerable truth, a man accused of the unthinkable. And it was 2 people who once broke each other's hearts finding a way to sit at the same Christmas table anyway, new partners included. Firth's story resists the easy word tragedy, precisely because tragedy needs a final fall, an ending that stays broken. What he has instead is something less dramatic and, in its way, more honest. A life where real achievement and real heartbreak have run side by side for 30 years, neither one canceling the other out, and where the work of figuring out who he is underneath all the roles he's played is still quietly ongoing. Go back to the beginning of the story and the shape of it becomes clear. An 11-year-old learns to hide who he is just to get through a school day in Missouri. Decades later, a grown man spends an entire career being paid to hide and reveal feeling on command, one performance at a time, winning every prize his industry has to offer for doing it well. In between, he loses a marriage in his early 30s before he's had time to really understand what went wrong, builds a second one that survives 22 years and a public scandal before it finally gives out too, and somehow keeps showing up afterward. Not fixed, not resolved, just present, still working, still willing to play men who are grieving or lost or morally compromised rather than retreating into safer, easier parts. That's not a downfall. It's closer to what most people's lives actually look like, if you're honest about it. Success and loss running on parallel tracks, neither one ever fully explaining the other, both of them true at once. Colin Firth just happened to live his version of that in front of an audience of millions, which is its own particular, unglamorous kind of hard.